Welcome to the 12th episode in the first season, Justice Center Weekly, a video cast from the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. I'm your host, Kevin Steele, and our guest this week is Sayeh Hassan, a very busy lawyer working on the legal team funded by the Justice Center. Sayeh has her name on a lot of files, but today we're going to talk about an issue that I would describe as on the horizon. That is, I suppose, the right to be charitable. And it came to the fore after the city of Barrie, just over 50 miles north of Toronto, tried to pass a bylaw forbidding people from handing out food and supplies to homeless people on public land. At this point, I'll hand it over to you, Sayeh. Please explain the issue.
Sure, and thank you so much for having me on your show, Kevin. This is a concerning issue that we became aware of a couple of weeks ago, where City Council in Barrie, which is a town in a city in Ontario, was looking at a bylaw to outlaw charitable giving to homeless people and people that were in need. So, for example, if you see a homeless person on the street in the middle of summer heat and they're in need of water, this would outlaw a person to give them a bottle of water, and they could be ticketed and they could be prosecuted. There's been quite a bit of concern and from lawyers as well as organizations that support homeless individuals on the streets. There was a lot of outcry, and thankfully, the city council decided that they were not going to vote on this issue, and they decided that that was not going to move forward after a lot of protests and a lot of individuals and organizations speaking out about it. But it certainly raises a lot of constitutional and charter related concerns on two fronts. One is when you're the person that you want to help, whether it's because of your religious beliefs, you want to help somebody that's in need, or whether it's because of your conscience where you feel compelled to help somebody that you see on the street who needs basic food, water, blanket. The fact that there would be a government or a city bylaw that would prevent you from doing this would potentially violate your Section 2 freedom of religion and freedom of conscience. And then on the other side of it, for the homeless person who's in need of these donations and these basic survival things that they need, for them, it's really an issue of right to life and right to the security of the person. Because again, if you're in the middle of the summer and you can't have access to water, or in the middle of the winter and you can't get a blanket from someone, that's going to be seriously damaging both your health and possibly even jeopardizing your life.
I see. So it actually works on both sides. There's no actual court issue right now because they did step back from this, I understand. But is this the kind of thing that you could see spreading? I know that they're trying to deal with these situations all over North America, actually, but in every city in Canada. They're trying to find a way to deal with the homeless. This was a pretty harsh, I would say, solution. But can you see this issue coming up again in other situations?
Sadly and unfortunately, yes, it is an issue that a lot of municipalities are dealing with. I'm from Ontario, from Toronto, so we have a huge problem with people that are on the streets here in Toronto and across Ontario. What was going on in Barrie, in my opinion, was really criminalizing poverty and criminalizing homelessness, which and it's hard to believe. I've never seen that. I've never seen any municipality or any government suggest something like that before, to say that you can't give food or water to somebody that's in need. The city council is now going to have a public meeting on September the 19th, where we, lawyers and other organizations, can make submissions to the city council on what we think the issues are and what the potential, for example, legal implications of something like this or something similar would be. And that's something that we are looking at, our team is looking at right now, reaching out to different organizations that are on the ground dealing with homelessness, so they have all the information that we can rely on in order to make submissions on the legal issues, the charter related issues, freedom of life, liberty, and freedom of conscience and religion. And it is unfortunate because it is happening all over the country, really. And I'm most familiar with Ontario. And there tends to be a lot of stereotype that these people are people with addiction, and so they have to get treatment, which is part of the problem. But unfortunately, it's so much more complex because a lot of these people are also dealing with serious mental health issues like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, things that they don't necessarily even they themselves don't realize that they have this illness. So it's very difficult to get treatment. And then when you're suffering from these kinds of serious illnesses, you tend to isolate your family, your friends, you have no support system, you have no money, you have no resources. And then it becomes so much more difficult to get help if you actually want to get help. And one of the things I think the governments really start need to start looking at is how do we deal with the root of this issue rather than criminalizing, poverty and criminalizing people handing out food and water to people. How do we deal with the root of the problem so that we don't have all of these people on the streets?
But you're not dealing with solutions. You're basically saying that this isn't a solution. The other part of it, is that going to be part of your submission, or are you talking about just making sure that they don't criminalize poverty and charity?
So we're going to be looking at it, of course, from the legal perspective and the charter and
Mm.
how it impacts it. But I think it is important for us and any lawyer really that wants to make these kinds of submissions to do reach out to the organizations that are on the ground and dealing with these issues on a day-to-day basis. To see what their recommendations are, for example, in terms of solutions, there may be a way for us to incorporate some of those suggestions into our legal submissions. But of course, we need to get more information. I'm certainly not an expert on homelessness, but it's something that I'm very passionate about. I think it's important that we address the issue because we are dealing with it now across the country.
Okay. I'm wondering whether this type of things, hypothetically, if it had passed, could it possibly spill out into other situations, other circumstances that made it, well, municipalities or any level of government could prohibit charity in any way? Could it have implications that way if they had moved forward?
There could have been a potential that if it was carried out in one municipality, that other municipalities would follow as well. But I think if it had happened, a lot of organizations, including our organization, would be seriously looking at this to take it to court and to challenge the constitutionality of it. I I mean, I've lived in Canada for 30 years, and I think we Canadians, we really tend to care about each other. We tend to be very charitable. And something like this kind of a bylaw, it's very un-Canadian, in my opinion. And it's not something that a lot of people would support it. I think we would certainly be taking something like that to court. And we have had sort of not exactly the same thing, but a different, similar issues that we've been dealing with in Toronto, for example, where during the winter they have warming centers. So it's when it's really cold and there are people on the street, people can go into these centers so that they can warm up and stay out of the cold. But the rule is that it has to be minus 15 degrees for people to be able to go into these facilities. If it's not minus 15, if it's, let's say, minus 10, the facilities are closed. So then you had all these people out in the cold with nowhere to go because it wasn't minus 15, but let's say it was minus 10 or minus 12. And that was another issue that we were kind of closely looking at and monitoring, because that also impacts your right to life and your security of the person if you're stuck in the cold with nowhere to go. And thankfully, the city changed that as well, and they decided that they would keep their warming centers open even if it wasn't 15 degrees. But that's another kind of similar situation where we're monitoring to because there are potential charter issues if those types of things continue.
Yes, I know, but there's been this tremendous concern in Canada over, levels of crime that are tied to levels of homelessness. And I mean, I could certainly see the argument that they were trying to make in that, they were trying to protect citizens and, children who wanted to go into parks and things like this from intrusion. So there was that side of it. Does that factor into your arguments at all?
And I understand that side of it, but what is the solution, right? The solution is what do we do with these people? We're not going to give them food and water, and what's going to happen? And that's why, I mean, homelessness is, it's very complex, and it's definitely, I don't know if there are any simple solutions out there, but I think maybe instead of putting their resources on coming up with these types of bylaws, maybe put the resources on where it needs to be, ensuring that there are actually places for these people to go. There are shelter beds that are available. There is mental health help that's available if somebody needs it. I can tell you, as I was a criminal defense lawyer for over 13 years before I joined the Justice Center, and I have seen countless people who wanted to get help, who could not get help. It simply was not available. If you can't get help with your private funds, if you're relying on the government, it will take months and months and months for you to get into any kind of a place, a rehabilitation place, or somewhere where they have a bed that they can help you. So really the focus needs to be on those issues so that we can get these people off the streets, get them the help that they need, put them into some, some kind of shelter or a home. And then that's that way we have safety and security on the streets, but we're also helping the people who are the most vulnerable people in our communities.
So they don't just wander away into another community.
Right, and
I,
like where are they I mean, just a couple of years ago, there was a news article about a homeless man who died in the middle of winter in Quebec, because of COVID. They had shut down the shelters overnight, so people couldn't stay overnight in these shelters. And so this man had gone into one of these portable toilets, and they found his body in there. I mean, that's so, to me, so un-Canadian. This is not what we're all about. I've been in contact with working groups here in Toronto that deal with homelessness, and I've heard from them that even in the last few months, people are dying on the streets. And that's, I don't think as a society, that is what we want to see. I don't believe that that's what we want to see. So we have to see what are the solutions. And criminalizing homelessness is not the solution.
okay. Fair enough. I wanted to relate this to another case that you've worked on because we did cover it on one of our podcasts, and that was the Briscoe case. This was the police officer who had donated to the Freedom Convoy. Is this similar in a way? You talked about the right to give people water, the right to people to give things. That was a case where you had the right to donate to a cause. Is this in any way related to that issue or is it completely separate?
Well, that one, Constable Briscoe's appeal has to do with freedom of conscience and freedom of expression. So
Mm-hmm.
two different contexts, but it's the same charter right to have the freedom to express yourself and to do what your conscience tells you to do. And in that case, Constable Briscoe was supportive of the Freedom Convoy and Tamara Leach and what they were promoting, which was, let's do away with the vaccine mandates. And so he gave a $50 donation to the Freedom Convoy. And for that, he was prosecuted by the police services. And now we're doing an appeal for him. And hopefully, we will be successful and that the panel will agree with us that his charter rights were in play and he was exercising his right to freedom of expression and freedom of conscience.
So it is same charter rights, but a different issue. Even though it's the
Mhm.
right to donate, it's not the right to be charitable in a way. I guess that's what I was trying to
Different
get at.
context, but the same
Yeah.
idea. We all in Canada, we have the right to express ourselves peacefully and to exercise our conscience and freedom of religion.
Right. In this bylaw, were they targeting any particular group? Were they going after a particular charity, as far as you know?
So, from what I understand, there's a charity in Barrie. It's called Busby Center, and they're very active in helping the homeless people, providing them with necessities like food, water, blankets, that kind of thing. And this is from what I understand. Some of this was happening by the waterfront, where there were homeless people, and this and necessities were being provided. So, one of the contentions between the center and the city was that they did not want that happening on the waterfront because, of course, for tourism and also the community who go to the waterfront. And from what I understand, the Busby Center did commit to moving that outreach program to other places, private places. So we would not be on the waterfront anymore. And that was one of the concessions, and it was something that helped the city decide that they were not going to move forward with the bylaw.
Okay, but you're still making a submission? Is that what I'm to understand, even though
Yes,
they're...
because the homelessness obviously is still an issue, and the city
Mm.
is looking at different ways and different avenues of how to move forward and how to deal with this issue. And so we are looking at it. And as I mentioned, we're going to be speaking and reaching out to different organizations, including Busby Center, to get information about what's happening on the ground, what are the possible solutions on the horizon, and then see if we can fit that into our legal submissions that will deal with charter issues, but also maybe we can offer some solutions.
Okay, so if this does come up again in another jurisdiction, you can be assured it's going to go to court, though. That's what you're saying. And you
Yes.
basically say you've got the charter case in hand, ready to go. Is that correct?
Yes, we're watching it very closely, and there have been charter cases. There was a recent one in Waterloo where there were encampments, and there was a bylaw that prevented encampments. And the court in Waterloo found that that bylaw was unconstitutional because there was no place for these people to go. There was clear evidence that the Waterloo didn't have enough beds to house these people. There weren't enough shelter places, and so there was nowhere for them to go. And the court said this is unconstitutional because these people need to have some kind of shelter and protection from the elements. So there are those types of cases and those kinds of findings by the court. And it's something that we are also watching. And if there's an opportunity, if there's a case that will come up, we are definitely going to be watching it very closely.
Okay. This would affect things like churches and religious organizations as well, I assume, that run these outreach programs all over, I guess, all over the country. I know of a few in my own city. So I assume, is freedom of religion coming into this at all, or is it simply freedom of expression?
I think of religion would also be engaged for people like churches who are doing this based on their religious beliefs, who believe that they need to uh, reach out to people in need and help them. So if that's being done because of their religious beliefs, then the freedom of religion would be engaged. And if it was somebody who was not religious but they were doing it because of their conscience, then it would be the freedom of conscience. I definitely can be both, and I think it could definitely impact churches as well as other organizations who are compassionate and who want to help these people that are in need.
Okay. I wanted to ask you, you said your submission will include solutions and, a discussion of homelessness and solutions to addiction and things like this. You will be using these things. Um, is this going to result in a Justice Center paper? That's what I'm wondering. Because it sounds like you're really diving into this in a rather deep way, both feet.
Well, you've given me
So,
a very good idea. I think we're definitely monitoring, and I've been reaching out to different organizations and setting up meetings. But that's a great idea to provide something for all of Justice Center. People that are interested, they can review and they can learn about it.
one thing I wanted to ask you, particular to Ontario, I'm not sure how the welfare system is set up there. I recall back in the 90s when I had some knowledge of this, that it was run by the municipalities, the welfare system. That is, each municipality ran the welfare portion, unlike other provinces that did it as a provincial whole. Is that sort of the way it's still done in Ontario?
I'm actually not sure about that. That's definitely something that
Hmm.
I can look into, but I'm not positive.
Okay, because I was wondering about the cost of all of this, because obviously that's at some point going to come up, at least between governments. It's not necessarily a charter issue, but everybody's going to start talking about their taxes at some point. So,
Yeah, and I know in Barrie, for example, there was talk of getting funds from the province.
mm,
It's something that all levels of a government need to be involved in, and I think provide funding. So a city is not going to be able to have all the funding they need for this. They're going to need funding from the province, and they're going to need funding from the federal government as well. And it's something that needs to be done jointly rather than just leaving it to one part of the government or one level of government.
okay, but I guess one thing we can assure people is that charities and the homeless will have their rights protected, at least as far as you can do it. Is that a fair assumption?
That is fair, yes. We're watching it very carefully.
Good. Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to add on this before we conclude? I try to think of other aspects, but until this, I guess, goes forward as a case, or if it comes back, there's not much that can be said beyond, preparing a paper at this point. Is there something you might want to add? The one thing I wanted to just put in here, could this impact other situations? And I guess that was the angle that I wanted to just finish up with.
It could, in terms of if that had passed, it could have been followed by other municipalities. And I've given you some
Okay.
examples of kind of similar things that have happened, for example, in Toronto. And we are definitely monitoring it. And besides the paper that you suggested, the goal is to make submissions to the city of Barrie on September 19th when they have this open public hearing about the homelessness issue. That's something that we're working towards right now.
Okay, but you hope it goes up to other levels of government as well.
Yes, I do. And if there's opportunities to make submissions, that's something that we're going to be looking at as well.
Okay, good. Well, great, Sayeh. I think that we can call an end to this episode 12 of Justice Center Weekly. Thanks so much for coming on the show, and I hope to have you back again real soon.
Thank you very much for having me.